Today, I am a little bit overwhelmed by our guest, not because she is anything but kind and generous, but because of the story. Her story that she is telling is one of those that I have felt a great deal of tenderness and empathy already for this woman, for Nancy. Thank you for joining us today, Nancy.
Thank you, Jan. I'm absolutely thrilled to be on your podcast, which I listen to avidly and has been a huge help to me to understand a bit of what my daughter went through. So thank you.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So, one of the things that you had mentioned in just sort of the pre-interview process and the many things that we can talk about today is that you're sharing because you have something to say, and there's an actual platform called Something to Say. And I want you to tell us a little bit about that, which will lead us into you telling your story, because I think that
Sure.
was very, very much a piece of how you came to the point where you could tell us this story, which is a tender story.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. There's Something to Say platform. It started as a written platform. It still continues. It's been set up by, there's a man called Jeremy Indica who also has a podcast talking about his abuse as a child, and much like you, very different contents, but very much like you, is desperate for people to be able to tell their stories and understands the power of people being able to come forward with their story. So Something to Say started as a written format, and now it's expanding into this video format on YouTube. And I saw that and thought, I've got something to say. I've got a story. And I felt that as the mother of somebody who'd been abused, it was a slightly different angle to things I'd seen before.
Yes.
And so, I put my video on there, and it's had a really lovely response from people who I think have heard some things they hadn't perhaps heard before, or just seen things from a slightly different angle. That's what I want to do, is to give people a slightly different view on who these people are that are abusing our children and what it's like
Yes.
as a parent to go through
Oh, and
this.
I think this is so needed. Yeah, to go through
Yeah.
that as a parent. I think this is such a needed conversation, rarely really talked about or highlighted. And that's why I am so, so incredibly grateful for your voice, that you did have something to say and you still have something to say, and to come on to our podcast and share with our listeners and also our YouTubers, because we put our things out there, is really a powerful impact, because you're stating things about the most loved person in your world, your daughter. So,
Yeah.
going back, do we go with the end in mind, or do we go back to the beginning? Where would you feel the most comfortable starting, Nancy?
Well, I think as a parent, because I'm very conscious of this being my story and not my daughter's story, I don't feel it's my place to tell her story. So as a parent, the first things that we noticed, let's say, the first time we really had a sense that there was anything wrong, other than bits along the way, but children have bits along the way, don't they? In her teens, we started to see some self-harm. And then when COVID came along, it became an eating disorder. We were seeing a really severe eating disorder take over. And that ended with her being in hospital and then in a unit. And her mental health just was really in a poor place. And we didn't know why. We didn't know what the cause of this was. And it wasn't until quite a bit later that, as she was renourished and able to speak a bit more perhaps, but also as a result of the fact that she started to have some really awful flashbacks, it enabled her to speak out. I think the pain of those flashbacks made her realise, I need this out of me. I need to communicate this. And she's young, as you know, the average age or the amount of time it takes for people to come forward from their abuse is normally, I think the average is about 20 years. So for her to speak up at 16 is actually quite young. But
Yes,
to me,
remarkable.
it's a sign. Yeah, it's a sign of the pain she was going through, though. And I witnessed some of the flashbacks she went through, and it's the most horrible, awful thing to witness because, as you and many of your listeners will know, I'm sure, but flashbacks are because of the fact that the trauma is stored in a different part in your brain. So whereas most of our life is stored in a linear way, and we know this happened at this age and this happened at this age, when we have something very traumatic happen, it stores in a different place. That means when you have the flashback to that, you feel like you are that age and there again. I'm sort of preaching to the choir to you, aren't I?
No, it's really good. I want you to preach to the choir because it takes all of us and all of our listeners, to hear from different, like you said, you wanted to tell your story as a parent because that matters in this conversation. And we have to hear these stories, many, many, many stories, in order to kind of start to formulate the ability to even see what's going on, So,
Yeah.
no, I want you to tell and preach to the choir throughout this entire our time together.
Okay. Because, so I could see that she felt she was back in this moment. At this time, we still didn't know what it was, what had happened. Because I remember a staff member saying to me, she was in the unit at the time, and saying to me, that breakdown she had today, it looked more like a flashback of trauma. And I had no idea what she was talking about. And I was saying, I don't know what you mean. A few weeks later, same again. It definitely seems to me like it's more of a flashback. And as I say, eventually I witnessed these, and it is a painful thing to witness, to watch your child in utter terror, saying some of the things that she said, which made it very clear she felt she was going through that right there and then. And so leading from that, she eventually reached a point where she was able to talk about her abuse. It took her some time when she first was able to speak to the professionals, because she was in a unit. So fortunately, there were professionals there who knew about this stuff, and she was able to talk to them about it. And thank goodness for that, because they dealt with it so sensitively and so carefully that she wasn't pushed to reveal any more than she was ready to reveal. For a while, we didn't know who had done anything to her. And finally, she was in hospital one time, and she called home and said to me, I'm going to tell you something, Mum, but it's going to destroy you. And, I immediately reassured her that I am here. Whatever you need to say, you say it, you're safe, it's fine. And she told me this is who it was. And so this man was married to one of my best friends. And we had been friends since primary school. And so she had been this amazing part of my life. And when she married this man, I was thrilled because he got on really well with my husband. And, that's a joy, isn't it? If you're one of your best mates and their husband get on with your husband. And it was this lovely friendship. And we were friends for many years, obviously, before we had children. And we trusted him. And it was a massive, massive betrayal, as you can imagine.
Absolutely.
I believed her immediately. I had no reason to doubt her, but she wasn't a liar. I was also aware enough to know people don't lie about this stuff. And after she said his name, she said to me, "But Mum, she's your best friend." So I said, "Well, we'll see. Let's see what her reaction is to this. That will be the telling of whether she really is." And sadly, no, she's chosen to believe her husband, and that's a huge betrayal as well.
So you're losing your bestie as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I get it because, as you know, the grooming that these people do is all encompassing. Everybody's groomed.
Right.
Obviously, our daughter was groomed, but we were groomed. And she, of all people, was groomed and continues to be groomed to believe that he is this sort of person who would never do that. That's what they do.
Oh, yeah. They're masterful, right? They're just
Yeah.
they're so good at it, which it just seems like, it's like giving some, predator a compliment just makes my stomach turn. But that's the
Same here.
fact,
Yeah.
friend. That's my experience. He was a
Yeah.
dear friend of the family,
Yeah.
and his wife and his 5 children. I mean, we were so close. It just, so good at grooming the entire orbit. Yeah, I totally understand.
It's in their interests to be incredibly good at that, because if they're not and they slip up, they will go to prison. Like, he has left any gaps for her to believe it's possible he's done this thing. They have to work incredibly hard at being exactly the person that you would go, not a chance. No way it's him. But in doing
Exactly.
that, they come across as this wonderful person who's so lovely in every way. Like, oh gosh, they're so lovely. I know from watching your series and your documentary how much they would do so much to offer to help with the family and be this nice guy. And it was,
Yep.
seemingly so lovely that it's impossible to imagine that someone who seems that good could also be this bad.
Yeah. And that's why so often victims are not believed. Luckily,
Yes.
again, my parents, when I finally told, I mean, everybody believed me in my immediate orbit, but I've had many people who online, or whatever, will just say terribly hurtful things. That happens all the time. That
Yeah.
that child or that teenager, that tweenager, they young adults, that just aren't believed because the person, there's no way that they could do that. Well, yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly what they're working towards, is for everybody to never
Exactly.
ever believe that could be possible. And we have to change that. That's called rape culture over here, at least in
Okay.
America. We
Yeah.
call that, where everybody has been cultured to not believe victims, and that it's very, very important to change our system from never believing or hardly ever believing victims to always believing the victim first, to always believing first. And then if there
Absolutely.
might be 1 in a million that made something up, maybe instead of it being like, well, most of these people who, they're not guilty, it's like, no, believe the victim first and foremost. And you did the right thing.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad. But I saw how ill she was. I think that did help. I mean, I'd like to think I would have believed anyway, but that did, obviously that helped. I think what you're saying there's 2 elements. One is that the child, the victim, is so often in some way threatened, made to feel that were they to speak up, something awful would happen. I mean, crikey, your case to the extreme. And I won't give details of what was said to my daughter, because the reason I don't is because the perpetrator, I sort of get myself in different loops of conversation on this, sorry, but he's walking free. He was
Yeah.
arrested, his equipment was seized, and but historical abuse, it doesn't have proof very often. So she had been, from what we know, 7 and 9 years old at for the sort of worst, if you like, of what she described had happened, and of course there was no proof of that. So he's
Right.
walking free, but he did threaten her, and I don't want to give that information, because if he does have other victims, which I can't prove, but statistically we think it's likely, they were able to come forward. I wouldn't want them to sort of say, well, he did this. And they say, well, you're only saying that because Nancy said that on that podcast and you're copying that. I would like them to say, this is what happened. Yes, that matches up with this case. We've got a chance of getting the guy, so that's why I won't say what he did.
Those details, but just to know
Yeah.
that threats were there and she was
Yeah.
just little, 7, 8, 9. No,
Yes.
that's just such a young age,
Yeah. And a
And
child
you're
will
right.
believe those threats.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that they're gonna be carried out, absolutely. They believe the threats, and usually these perpetrators layer on the compliments and the gifts and the everything else as well. I mean, it usually is a
Yeah.
layered thing, and it's like, it's so confusing for the children. They just, of course, they just believe all of it. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
they're seeing my parents love this guy. What a loved person he is, and no doubt there'll be lots of little hints and things shown to the child to show, look how much I've got your parents in my control, how much they love me, what they believe of me, all in the mix, isn't it? So this child just feels, well, I have got no chance against this person who's threatened to do this if I say anything, and look, they're making it obvious my parents trust them. That's
Right.
such a powerless feeling for a child, isn't it?
Yes. And also there's the feeling that they love the person if they've been a part of your life, as it was in your case with, your
Sure.
best friend or one of your best friends, and it's that husband who's been around and knows, they may even have feelings of, well, I love this person too, or I trust them. And now it's super confusing. The whole thing
Yeah.
is so horribly confusing.
So confusing. And they were given honorary auntie and uncle status in our house. They were, so they really were loved by all the children. I've got 2 younger children who, as far as we know, were not touched. That's another thing I'll come back to as well about the choosing which child they're going to abuse. But
Right.
you were saying about how you get some negative feedback from people and people saying horrible, awful things, which is just abhorrent in the first place. But secondly, I think it's because we think as a society we would know better. We think there's no way we would be conned or manipulated by someone. We think we're better judges of character than we actually are. And in fact,
Right.
just earlier this evening, I was watching a documentary about a con man, and a chap on there said, honest people expect honesty. And I thought, yes, bingo,
Yeah.
that's it. We think we're looking at people who are like us all the time, and we think we can trust what we see in people. And the reality is that, okay, a lot of the time, yes, most people are good people. But some people who look like good people aren't good people. And one of the
Right.
things I think is that when we watch, so your amazing series, which is fantastic and really shows such a lot of what happened to lead up to your very sad story. But even watching something like your program, someone who's never experienced this, they go in to watch it and it's called A Friend of the Family, and then they see the little synopsis of what's going to be about before they start watching. And then they start watching and they know that this guy's going to be the bad guy. And they're seeing things of what he's doing with you in a way that your parents would not have seen. So as a
Right.
viewer, you are given this power and this information that if you're living the life, you don't see. And so it's easy to
Right.
assume that because I watched this program, I could see B's a baddie. Oh my God, what's he doing now? You think I would see it like that if I was the parent in this situation. And the reality is you don't. And you
No.
can't show that nuance, can you, in a 9-part series, any amount of television. You can't show the reality of, what is a normal family's day of life? You've got to wash the dishes. You've got to put the washing on. You've got to get kids to school, make dinners. Da, da, da. You are not watching your children constantly, solely. You can't see everything.
Yeah, and just in general, I just think it's so interesting how people think, well, could never happen to me. My kids talk to me. I'm like, I had the kind of parents that it sounds like your children have. Parents who, a mom that they can talk about anything at any time too, and feel unconditionally loved. That's what I had. And I
Yeah.
talked to my parents about everything and felt listened to. I was so lucky with the family that I had. And so when people say that to me, I'm like, if anybody would have told their parents if it were that easy, it would have been me. But once you
Yes.
have threatened a child, once you're threatened and you think you're being watched and that there's, this, you don't tell. They're
No.
so good at knowing exact developmentally where a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old is at. They're not going to tell you it, no matter how much you have really tried to make sure that and I don't want to scare everybody to think that there's nothing we can do, but what I think the education that you're bringing to our show today and for parents that might be listening is the fact that we have to see through the grooming. We have to
Yes.
see the groomer. If we could see that better, if we could understand how that is happening or has already happened and see our child struggling and go, something's wrong. And I got to look at the people that are closest to me because it's hardly ever a scary stranger. It's
Yeah.
hardly ever.
That's it. It's not the dirty old man. It can be those awful, dodgy men down the street or whatever, that we were brought up to think. But
Sure.
95% of it is someone trusted and loved.
Yep.
And yeah, so getting that across, that the reality is of this is where it's happening. But also, actually, one of the things you talk a lot about that I totally agree with, I couldn't agree more, is the people talk about red flags. And there's a danger in this talk of red flags because it makes you think. People will say, oh, you stupid parent, why didn't you see the red flags? And there aren't any flipping red flags. There are gut feelings.
Yes.
And I think from my point of view, this is one of the things I really, really, really want to push home because I feel that when I was in a position to have hindsight, once I knew what had happened to my daughter, then I could start looking back and go, oh, actually, that thing was a bit weird and that's a bit odd. And over the last nearly 2 years of knowing, my husband and I have picked apart a lot of things that suddenly now, in the context of knowing what we know now, are making sense. But at the time, they were not red flags. And what they were gut feelings. So in the video that you watched that I made, one of the ones I described was that when we had our daughter was about 3 or 4 years old. We went on a holiday with the abuser and his wife. And he offered to read a bedtime story to our daughter, which we thought was just lovely. That's nice. That's good. I can clear up the dishes after dinner. And when I went to check in on how's the story going, they were lying together on top of the bed, on top of the covers, but on top of the bed. And it just gave me that gut feeling of, this doesn't feel comfortable. I don't think this is appropriate that they're lying together on the bed. I just didn't like it. And as I say in the video, it's because I thought if that was my brother or my dad reading a story to her, they wouldn't lie on the bed. They'd sit up with her or they'd sit on a chair to the side. But I didn't know how to say anything about it. I didn't know how to broach it in a way that didn't make me look like I was either not being very nice to him because he's doing something nice, reading a story to my daughter, or make me look like I'm being a bit of a loony. And I just didn't know how to say it. And that's the thing I think is that with hindsight, I think we've got to take those gut feelings and translate them ourselves into red flags, to actually pay attention to them and say, hang on, that something there didn't feel right. Something made me feel uncomfortable. And it doesn't mean that person is definitely a perpetrator and out to abuse my child, but it didn't feel right. And it's something I wasn't happy with. So I need to voice this. And so what I think is really important is A, recognizing gut feelings, and B, vocalizing where our boundaries are for anything around our children and not being afraid to do that, So I wish I had said at the time, oh, I'm sorry. Would you mind sitting up? I'm not very comfortable with my daughter thinking it's all right to lie down on the bed with an adult. And in reality, what's the worst that could have happened in that situation if I'd said that? Because you're so busy thinking, oh, I'm going to feel like I'm being rude. But in
Right.
reality, he would have probably gone, oh, yes, okay, sat up. My daughter would have recognised, oh, mum doesn't want me to lie down on a bed with an adult. That's a great message I've given to her. She now knows. And he's seen, importantly, given the fact that he was a perpetrator, I'm watching and I'm setting boundaries for my children because of the research I've done. And I've heard some abusers talking on various things I've listened to. A deterrent is if they see that the parents are watching and are
Sure.
vigilant. And so I think we need to get better at that.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about creating boundaries that can be expressed, in real terms. Like, this is a boundary. You don't have to say it that way, but oh,
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable, and sweetie, this is an adult, and you, when he, have this story, have to sit up for this story. This is not okay for this adult. Not hoping not to make your child feel guilty or bad, but definitely to be putting out the boundary,
Yeah.
because we do spend a lot of time trying to be nice and not be rude. And I always call it the secondary thought. You have a gut feeling and you have this thought, ooh, I'm not comfortable with that, or ooh, that doesn't look right, or ooh, I want that to change. And then your second thought is, oh, that's ridiculous. He's my best friend's husband and he's just doing a nice thing. That's the second
Yeah.
thought. And I'm
Yes.
like, just pay attention to how often you dismiss or excuse someone else's behavior and then start setting boundaries on your gut, what the gut
Yeah.
feeling is, or the heart feeling, because I think that I think that intuition can hit the gut or it can hit the heart. Sometimes it hits the brain, but usually it's down in these other areas where something just doesn't feel right. That's why I hate the term red flags, because if it
Yeah.
was a red flag and you're good parents like mine were, they would have stepped in front of the moving train with the blinking lights and the big red flags and, the big ding, 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 thing. I'm like,
Yeah.
my mom and dad would have taken a hit from a bus, for their daughters. They loved us, with every ounce of their being. So don't talk about these things being like red flags because nobody sees them. It's that gut feeling that you're talking about that matters. Your first thought, not your
Yes.
dismissive thought.
Yeah. And if there were red flags, the statistics would not be as high as they are. And I think it's either 1 in 4, 1 in 5. I don't know what it's like in the States. Kids before they're 18 have been abused. And if these things were red flags, that wouldn't be true because we'd be seeing them and we'd be acting on them. Because this isn't just happening
Exactly.
in the families of children who are abandoned, who are, without good parental care. This is happening in families like yours, like mine, where we love our kids. We are communicative with our kids, where they have an amazing support around them and friends and everything. This is happening in those homes.
Yeah.
And if it was a red flag, they wouldn't be because we're observant, watchful parents.
So we have to do more in focusing our efforts on those gut feelings, those heart-centered feelings, those sensitivities that we often dismiss, that
Yeah.
we often make an excuse for because we
Yeah.
don't want to be rude, we want to be nice, or because that person is grandpa. That's impossible. What am I thinking? Why would I have that feeling?
You speak with your partner. My husband and I talk about this, that I'd come back from that situation and go, oh, I didn't really like it that he was lying on the bed. And he'd say, oh, but, it's him. And it's, I'm not saying that's my husband was saying, but that's how you do it.
They like each other. They're friends. Well, he's
Yeah.
gregarious. Well, he just loves kids, whatever.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah,
already
yeah.
established who this person is, what we think this person really is. And so that's therefore why we don't trust that, because they're friends too. That's what was so wonderful. One of my best friends, her husband and my husband, they get along. We get to do stuff together. We even went on holiday together. You just said it, right?
Yeah.
That's who it is. It is not the scary stranger. Hardly. I mean, it is a few times, but hardly ever.
No. And honest people expect honesty. So you look for well, that
Yeah.
can't have been, my gut feeling must be wrong because we're expecting this person to be a good person. And we're very, very much putting people into boxes of good people, bad people in life. We don't seem to see the grey very well on people we like. We tend to look for the good, don't we?
Definitely. Absolutely. And they make sure of that because they're so good at showing all of their best, all the best pieces of whether those are real, like they really are, there are those good pieces, or it's just all to create the smoke screen. It's
It's
all to
impossible to
create the ruse.
understand, isn't it? I can't,
Yeah,
I
it is.
question myself on that. Was any of that real? Was any of him
Yep.
real? I don't think I'll
Yeah.
ever know. There was another thing you were saying about, well, talking about children, which children get groomed and which children get abused. And something I think a lot about is that when we hear the word paedophile, child abuser, predator, we think that those people will abuse every child. And the other thing I want people to think about is that same as I'm a heterosexual woman and I find males therefore attractive, I don't find every male attractive. And the same goes for a child abuser, that they might only go for girls versus boys or vice versa, or a certain age group. And importantly, a vulnerability in that child they'll detect. And one of the issues that we've really had is that there are people who are friends of the perpetrator and his wife who, as far as we know, believe his innocence. Not that any of them have come to ask us, tell us the story, tell us
Right.
why you know this is the case. Whatever he has chosen to peddle, they have chosen to believe. And I guess that's the easy way, isn't it? You don't want to change your view on this person. But one of the things I think is there'll be friends among them who have got children that have spent time with the perpetrator. And part of why they believe him is because, well, he spent time with my child and my child will say nothing happened. And that thing of, well, he didn't abuse this child, so he can't be a child abuser is
Right.
nonsense. In your situation, you had sisters, female friends of the same age. He didn't choose
Yep.
them. There
Nope.
was something about your vulnerability that he sensed, right, this is somebody I can choose. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn to discuss your
No,
story.
no,
I
it's
feel
absolutely
like I
right.
know because of listening to your podcast and watching the show. But the same with our daughter. She was a people pleaser, first child, quite shy, and was obviously, to his eyes, a viable target. And plus us,
Yeah.
plus looking at us,
Yeah.
we were groomable. We were empathic people. You know, we were groomable as well. And that's a whole package. They need to be able
Yeah.
to see that this whole thing works.
Right, because they gotta knock down all the people in the way of their
Yeah,
intended victim, and targeting the victim is the first step in grooming. That is step number 1. You target, and
yeah,
that's what they do. They take all that data of that child, those vulnerabilities or parents and the setting and it's like their little computer just figures it out. This is the perfect target, and that's the person that I find I want, that I for whatever the reasons are. And sometimes we will never know what that means, but it is true. It's not every child, obviously. And
yeah.
so why can't we wrap it around our head that they are very specific about who they target and why? I have the hardest time. It's the reason why one of my main tenets of everything that I try to do is that I want people to be believed, because
Yeah.
it just drives me so crazy that we don't believe victims, that parents don't believe their children, that authorities, that police officers, that even child services that have been trained sometimes. There's this overwhelming desire not to believe in bad things that are happening. It's like,
True.
if I can just turn my mind off to that, then maybe it doesn't exist. Well, it does. And until we turn our mind on and our eyes on and our ears on and our hearts and our guts on to be tuned into, what might be happening, we are not going to get this problem solved because the numbers are very similar here in the United States as they are where you are. It's one. It used to be 1 in 4 girls, but now the newer things coming out, and from very reliable sources say 1 in 3. We believe that it's really 1 in 3 girls and about 1 in 4 boys. And it was 1 in 6 boys, and before that it was 1 in 13 boys, and before that it was like 1 in 24 boys or 25 boys, but it keeps changing because, thank goodness, people are starting to come forward, and we're hearing about more stories, and more is being reported, but still not everything, so these are shocking statistics. This is worse than cancer, right? It's worse than any pandemic we've been through in the world. It is so bad. I can't figure out why everybody is not out there going, okay, let's get behind this and figure out what's going on and how to prevent it, how to help people heal from it. It's just...
It's too uncomfortable a subject for people, Jan. People do not want to talk about it because if they talk about it, it's real. And then it might be happening around me. And the reality it is happening around you. The people you're walking past in that figure is the same for the number of people you walk past in the street. When you go around the supermarket and do your shopping, a quarter of the people in there have suffered abuse. I mean, we need to talk about it, and we need to make it comfortable for people. Comfortable is the wrong word, but easier for people to come forward and to tell their truth and to know what you say, to know they will be believed. Because there are many people who will believe, and it's just, yes, they need to know that there is a place. This is where your Thrivivors comes in, where the Something to Say platform comes in. Here's a place where you can safely come, you can tell your story, and we will believe you and support you.
Right.
So important for people to know that they have that safety. Because it's terrifying, isn't it?
Yes. The main thing that I think you bring up that I really want people to get from your story and what you've, kind of shared with us behind the scenes, and I hope you're okay to talk about this, is what happens when we don't believe someone and what happens when we do believe them and yet they haven't had enough of the healing or the time or the resources, then they're still left with these horrible feelings about themselves or the terrible nightmares, the terrors that you're talking about, and that people don't see abuse as something like fighting in a war. And yet that's exactly the same kinds of results when you are, raped or abused or exploited or trafficked or whatever that thing happened. The outcomes can be the same kinds of things that a combat veteran experiences. And yet we're not giving resources. I mean, luckily you said your daughter was in a unit, which I'm assuming is like a mental portion of the hospital or wherever she was, mental health. That's good. And sounds like she had some good help, but the damages of that long-held secret or whatever whatever you want to call it, had resulted in an eating disorder.
And I think she was so tortured, she felt, I have to, perhaps having the professionals around her help to see she would get some help. She was suicidal from it because there's so much shame for the victims of this crime. And it's one of the things that makes me so angry that a victim should be made to feel shame for something that is done to them. You are a child and you cannot choose this thing. You have got no part in deciding this thing is happening. It's so confusing for a child. And there should be no shame for the victim. The only shame should be for the perpetrator. There should be no shame for the people surrounding who haven't seen this, because you have been the victim of I hate using positive words, but a skilled manipulator. And you weren't to know that that's what you were dealing with, and shame is a terrible, terrible part of it, and also stops people speaking up so much because they're feeling shame that what will people think of me?
Right, and what do people think? Because I didn't run in the street and start screaming, it's like you're frozen. So often a freezing, that response, because there's fight, flight, or freeze. You respond in one of these ways, but almost always with young people, um, you freeze. And
Yeah,
then what you're left with is shame, because whether the skilled manipulator, as you called yours, and they are, because they skillfully implant that idea, or if it's just because you all of a sudden have no control over your body, over what's happening to you, and if you tell, there are threats and things that are going to happen, and that shame thing just is there. It's
yeah,
like, it makes me angry too. Like, how is it that the victims are the ones left with all the shame? How do
yeah.
we, how do we preemptively, strike back before something like this even happens? But how do you help children know it's not your fault? It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
One of the things I think that we could potentially be doing with our children, there's a lot of talk now about people talking about using the proper anatomical terms for our bodies with our children, so they have
Yes.
that information. But I also think, one of the things that we started doing with our youngest daughter since all this is using the term your body, your rules. And we very much make this, if she's playing around with her brother and he's starting to get a bit rough, I'll say, you're in charge of how long this goes on for. And if you want it to stop, you say stop and he will stop. And trying to sort of interject this, you have control over what is done to your body. And so when we greet our nieces and nephews at family get-togethers, rather than do the expecting a hug thing, we'll say, hug, high five, fist bump, and the child gets to choose what physical interaction they have with you, because they need to feel in
Yes.
control of their bodies and to know that this is my choice. And I think things like that are quite important. So one of the things I was talking about in the video as well is this thing that one of the things that these perpetrators often do is stuff in plain sight. There'll be stuff done in plain sight, which is testing the parents to see what will they do in this situation. And a sort of quite good, clear example of this is if someone's doing rough and tumble with the child, which some people like to do and play around with kids and do that. Again, if you've already taught this, your body, your rules, you can say that to the child. You do this while you're having fun, but if you're not having fun, you say, and Uncle What's It will stop doing that because it's your body, your rules. But what they're doing, if you haven't done it, is they're testing, they're touching the child in this way in front of you and seeing whether you'll say anything. And if you don't say anything, not only has that person seen, I can get away with this in front of mum and dad, the child has felt, well, mum and dad think this is okay. And so if that touch turns to a more sinister touch in a private moment later on, how the hell's the child supposed to know that this is now sinister touch when this touch was done in front of my mum and dad and seemingly is okay? So a child does not know about sexual touch. They don't understand. They must start to understand things don't feel comfortable. But if they haven't been given that boundary of it's your body and your rules, or actually mum told me I can say stop and that person will stop and expect that should stop. If they've
Right.
learned that, it gives them some sort of armor, if you like, against if that
Yes.
situation is in private.
Oh, that's so good, because honestly, if you're not practicing, if you don't have a way to practice those things when it is, innocent touch, so that
Yeah,
I don't like this. I don't like to be tickled.
yeah,
I don't want to be wrestled to the ground and, somebody can sit on me. I want this to stop, and that it will stop, that you
yeah,
have the voice. And that really is the precursor to consent.
yes,
So, you're giving them power to be in charge of what is okay. And you're also at the same time, like you're saying, you're teaching them the right words, and at the appropriate age. For my son, he was 5 when we were sitting on a driveway and waiting for a ride. And, I look back on that time and he just started to ask me something about, babies and where they come from. And I we had this amazing talk, for those 20 minutes or whatever it was while we were waiting for a ride. And I just thought, wow, I tried to keep it in his terms at
Yeah.
5, and I tried to not be secretive or embarrassed or any of that. Just very, matter of fact, like this is this and this is that. And I'd always use the right terms with him anyway. The only person I wanted to kind of talk to about it was my best friend.
Right.
She and
Yeah.
I would talk about certain things, and we'd read the health book. I mean, we never had any, you know, pornographic anything, but we would, read things about our bodies like in the little series because her mom had bought her a little series of books and they were all health related. They were like little
Okay.
medical books. So we'd look up the part and look at the body parts, and I think, but I never really asked the question. So we really had never had the talk.
It was a very different time, and
Yes.
I think as generations have gone by, in a way, I wouldn't have spoken to my mum about all that either. I don't think. Now we are more open to talking about this stuff with our kids. We are getting there, and that's
Yeah.
a good thing. And I think that we need to be doing more of that. Obviously, like you say, in an age appropriate way. There's an excellent video
Yeah.
on the NSPCC website, National Society Prevention of Cruelty to Children. It's a British site, but you can find it anywhere. And it's called Pantosaurus, like the dinosaur, or the made-up dinosaur, I should say. And I know pants for you are trousers, and for us they're underwear. But it's this little song, and it's a really good little video you can play to young children. And they can watch, and it's all about, we don't let people, if someone asks to see underneath your underwear, we say no. It's all this kind of message. And it's just I just think finding stuff like that, when kids are small and starting from a young age, to interject this little bit of education in a fun way that lets them know they've got control over what happens and
Yeah.
people touch these places. We're arming them a little bit.
I want to have things like that mandated, that we have to teach that in the curriculum at school. Because for
Yeah.
the parents that are the abusers and in their home, they're not going to teach that song to their kids. And I want that. I want them to be able to access it because, like you said earlier when we were talking about, sometimes it feels like a good touch. You don't really know the difference because nobody's ever, and especially if you're a child that's neglected on some level by maybe, the immediate family, maybe your parents, but then it's grandpa or the uncle, the favorite cousin, somebody else that is paying attention to you. And then you don't know until you're in health class that, oh, what's been happening to me is actually not okay.
I am very conscious that we need to give information to children, but not make them the ones responsible for saving themselves. We need to be armed
That's
as
right.
parents with this
Yes.
gut feeling thing. I think the gut feelings we have really lost as a society because we're so used to being told what to do and information on the internet and this, that, and the other. There's a lot we don't listen to in our bodies, and our bodies are set up with these things as warning signs. This is developed in our bodies
Yes.
to help us recognize things, and we stop listening. There will be times where you'll get a gut feeling, and it won't be for anything awful, but still listen. And even if you sort of go, well, that felt weird, I'm going to make a note of it in my mind. I'm going to recognize that happened and who it was around. And either I'm going to keep a watch of that person, or I'm going to think about what could I have said in that situation to change, how to deal with how I felt about it. So could I have spoken up and set a boundary? And I don't have to do it in the moment. Like we often don't do is, that whole, I wish I'd said this, I wish I'd said that. You
Right.
can put this stuff in later. So you could even say, if I hadn't said anything to the guy, which I didn't, but if I had thought to myself, oh, I wish I'd said something about him lying on the bed, I could have the next morning at breakfast said, I've been thinking about the book reading. If you do it again, please could you on the bed? So I can do that later. Or I could say to my daughter, you laid on the bed. Actually, if you're doing that again, I'm going to ask the adult to sit up with you, so that you've made sure that you've acted on those gut instincts.
I mean, this conversation has been so fantastic. And I want to make sure that we've kind of covered the things that were most important to you when we talked about having you on the podcast, and you said we definitely have to talk about gut feelings and how we've gotten away from that and how important it is, because honestly, that is like the thing. It's like that little subconscious computer that's taking in all this data that we're not even aware of. And then I think that all of a sudden, all that data goes, alarm, a little, something's up, something's wrong, blah, blah, and we don't even realize it because it's so subconscious. But we have to listen to that because it didn't come out of nowhere. A gut feeling or a heart-centered feeling about something, anything in this region of our body, it comes from data that we are almost unaware of because we're so busy thinking pragmatically. Like you said, we're so trained to like give over all of our, information to somebody else,
Yeah.
And so I think that we really covered that. I think that's really important. And then you wanted to talk about the vocalizing boundaries to other adults who are around our children. I loved that. That really hasn't been something we've focused on with anybody else. And I think that idea of, well, if you think about it and you think further about it, go the next day, the next week, the next time and say, hey, I really love that you would, take my kids to, the park or to read them a story or to whatever. But here's some of the boundaries that just they have to be here for me and my child knows about them. My child knows and they know that my body, my rules. This is something that, so these are the things that for me to feel comfortable and for my child to feel safe and, just so that you're safe too, this is what we're going to do. It doesn't have to be a criticism because that may prevent something.
And try not to feel ashamed of having those boundaries, because I think that's the other thing is we're worried about people thinking we're weird if we set a boundary. And I think that actually what you need to think about is what's the worst case scenario? If you're taking my child out, Jan, and I say to you, this is a certain boundary, you're either going to think, oh yeah, fine, of course, I'm happy with that. Or you're going to say, well, why? That's a weird one. I haven't heard that before. Why do you do that? Or worst case scenario, you're going to go home to another friend and say, that Nancy's really weird. She asked me to do this. I don't know why, but she did. That's the worst case scenario. So what skin is that off my nose that you might think I'm a weirdo if it's protected my child,
And I love that you said that about we will teach children all these things. We will continue to do that and do a better job of it and do it in a more realistic, way and with the little songs and with the correct body parts and all the things that we were talking about. That should be part of the curriculum for learning. There are certain things, right, that we are that I think we are seeing and we know on some level, but man, there's a lot of pushback for teaching our kids about these things. And I'm like, is it just the people that just do not believe that if we talk about these things, it will make it worse? Because just the opposite is true. All the statistics show that the opposite is true. So why are we doing this in our schools? Anyway, we can have a whole conversation about that.
Such an uncomfortable subject for people, isn't it? Yeah. I was going to say that the thing that that I don't think I've mentioned, because we talked a bit before we started recording, but I don't think I've made clear to your listeners, is that the outcome of what happened to our daughter is that she took her life. And this is now about 18 months ago that she was able to take her life. And she did that because of what had happened to her and what she'd gone through. And this is why I'm here talking to you. This is why I made the video, is because I have now got this hindsight and I've got no daughter to apologize to for it, to talk through what else we missed. And I don't want other people sitting where I'm sitting, losing their child or having to hear that their child has been the victim of an awful abuse. And so for me, it's really important to try to pass on some things that I've learned since, because I'm one of these people that when something happens, I have to then research. Of course, I wish I'd done that before and known stuff to not put me in this position. But now that I have this information, I want to pass it to other people who can hopefully listen to it, make some little tweaks and changes that might make them spot something, listen to their gut, say something to their child that helps arm them with something that means they might speak up. And anything that I can say from what I've learned that might help somebody else not have to sit speaking to lovely you, much as I love to speak to you, Jan. I'm honoured you got me here. I'm here because I've lost
Yeah.
my daughter and I don't want other people in that position. So yeah, I just wanted to make that
Yeah.
because I suddenly realised I
Yeah.
don't think we talked about that that
No,
reason for why. Yeah,
I wanted to let it be you that talked about it, and I wasn't sure if you
yeah,
wanted to. So thank
yeah.
you for sharing that in that way. That's the tender part about this episode is that, the worst parent's nightmare, I just admire your strength and your commitment to telling your story so that others might be able to prevent that because they saw something, they said something, they've set some boundaries, they got some information sooner than later. And that's really such a humbling place for you to come from after losing your daughter.
It's
And
such a powerless
I'm so
place to be,
sorry.
isn't it? Thank you. Thank you. It's this
Yeah.
powerlessness. And I know you know that as a victim, the powerlessness. And I feel it as a mum, the powerlessness of this having happened. And I didn't see it. And I didn't know how to recognize any signs or see anything and it's a powerless feeling. And it's powerless feeling that he's out there walking the streets claiming innocence, potentially hurting other children. And I have no power over that because at the moment, there's no way of getting him arrested and put in prison where he belongs. But I feel that if I can do some work that helps maybe somebody else come forward, if anybody comes forward, because I think there's a lot of power in with historical cases, there being more than one victim come forward. If there is a historical case, like I say, if another of his victims were to come forward, assuming there's another victim, they can use the details from my daughter's case to strengthen their case. And I sort of feel quite strongly that as time goes on, that's something I really want to work towards, trying to find a way to help people come forward more so that they can combine cases and convict people of historical abuse.
Oh, so many, 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 many more that are never convicted. They're never brought even to any kind of a trial. There's just, well, there's not enough evidence. We're not going to move forward. That's the
Yeah.
response.
The system isn't,
Ugh.
I mean, that's another whole several hours we could sit and talk, Jan, about the fact that these people are not given proper punishment and they get to come out and continue. And equally,
Yeah.
that this guy who is responsible for my daughter being gone is walking the street. He can say whatever he likes about what happened in his police interview. I don't know what he's told everybody, but he can say anything. He can make it sound like it was nothing. And we know he's responsible for some truly hideous things and for our daughter not being here. And how is that the world right for that to be the case? And that's my one story. There have been many, many people listening to this even who have got the same story or similar in that respect. It's all wrong. It's all
Absolutely.
wrong.
It's totally backwards.
Yeah, we need to make it easier for people come forward. Yeah.
Yep. Well, and the last thing that you had said is that you want to make sure we talked about was a believing those who are
Yes.
brave enough to
Oh,
speak up and to come forward. Because
yeah.
until we start with believing, we're going to continue to have people be too scared, and especially if they're a young person. I mean, your daughter was remarkable that she did step forward and say something at 16. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. That rarely happens. It's usually about 20 years later. We have to lead with believing the victim.
Yeah.
They're reporting a crime.
Why would they say that? Why would they say that if it wasn't true? Really, truly need to ask yourself. Like you say, you go in, you don't even ask that. You go in and you believe. And I think it is difficult because sometimes it's like with our daughter, it took time for her truth to be told. She couldn't do it all at once. It was too
Right.
painful. And also wasn't necessarily
Right.
in the right order, if you like. It was bits and pieces here and there. And that's normal. That's quite often how it plays out. Because to talk about it, I've not experienced being a victim. Thank goodness, lucky me, goodness me. But imagine that when you tell your truth, you're reliving it. You're having to express what you have gone through. The pain to relive that must be hidden. I can't imagine. So we really need to be open to listening to people, helping them feel safe, supported. I'm here for you whenever, in your own time. I believe you. I trust you. I think we need to be better at that as a society.
Yes. Oh, I so agree. I really, I do. I think that's like the very most important thing you can do for someone in your own circle. So when you said, like, you're in the grocery store and you look around and you're like, a quarter of these people have been through some kind of sexual assault, abuse, exploitation, rape. They've been through something where sexual violence, where sexual, harm has been done before the age of, or by the age of 18. 25% of people in the grocery store. Well, the other 75% of the people in the grocery store are the family members, the mums, the dads, the brothers, the sisters, the grandparents, or the nieces and the nephews and the friends of the abused person. So it has affected every person in the grocery store.
And prepare yourself for that, because you can be the person that helps them speak potentially. Who knows? If you were the person to help them come forward, what a gift that is to you. If someone is prepared to tell you their story, and what a gift you can give them to believe them and support them through something more hideous than those of us who have not been through it can possibly imagine. I can't possibly imagine it. And I feel like I've watched and understood an awful lot of what my daughter went through, and yet I still can't begin to imagine what it's like to have lived it. I want to support anybody else who might feel they can speak up.
And that is such a beautiful gift. And that's the gift that you gave to us and our listeners today, is to give the gift of your experience and your lived experience, especially with such a tender, just, I can't imagine, under these many circumstances of losing her just at the point where she was beginning to be, you were hoping that she would be freed up, be able to live that life. I mean, that's such a tender age anyway for a parent. You're just hanging on, just like pins and needles, like, let's get through these years because your life is going to be amazing. And I just think you're an amazing human being to be able to bring your experience, this, in this really a very short period of time, to come to this place. It's only been 18 months since she's been gone. I mean, that's a really, and I hope that you will also know that, because it's happened to you, this kind of trauma, not the same thing, but this kind of a trauma because of abuse, that, we are also here believing you and defending you and your daughter and millions of others that have been through this similar thing, that we will make change, that things can, if we will give the gift of listening and believing people's stories and just listening, letting them tell it all, not trying to fix them, just supporting them, like you so beautifully stated. That's the greatest gift you can give to a survivor, is to just believe them. And you do that by listening with empathy and let them talk, and just listening. Because when you go to one extreme, which is, I'm going to kill this person, or, I can't, then they have to take care of your emotions. If you can just be a solid listener and just believe them, that is one of the greatest gifts. And you've really left that in such a beautiful way with all of us who got to hear your story today.
Thank you for having me on, Jan. Thank you so much. I really hope that there's something in there somewhere that'll help someone, and not have to go through what I've gone through. And but I do it for my beautiful daughter, and she would have fought this fight. She didn't get the chance to become a survivor. She remained a victim of what he did to her. I believe that speaking out and telling your truth is what makes you the survivor. And so I'm sort of trying to do that on her behalf. She would have done it better than me.
I love
but
that.
I still try and do it on her behalf.
Oh, Nancy, what a beautiful job. Now I worry after we finish an interview like this, like, what are you going to do with the rest of your evening? Is it time for bed now where you are? It's dark.
It's 11 p.m. It's 11 p.m. So I will go. My husband will be waiting up because he'll want to know all about it. He's saying, I can't believe you're talking to Jan because I'm listening to her all the time. It's so weird to think you're talking to her. No, he'll want to
So
know.
wonderful. You're now part of my friend circle. You're part of my heart circle. And I want you to just feel loved and supported. And you can reach out to me or to my team that's equally, they're all so amazing.
Thank
That
you.
we just really want you to feel that support and love. And we want to work together. Maybe there's something internationally that we will work on together because this
I'd love
crosses
that.
borders. This crosses,
Yeah.
we really, these initiatives, these legislative changes and policy changes, and the way that we talk to our children, and the way that we help them set boundaries, and the way that we teach them the little songs and then your body, your rules, all the things that you said today are going to make a huge impact on millions of people eventually as the ripple goes forward. So thank you for sharing such a tender story with us and for who you are, Nancy.
Oh, thank you, Jan. Thank you.